Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shells, debt slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk about the tariffs under Biden. And that's something that everyone has completely forgotten about. And a lot of it is because there wasn't the political backlash and the media frenzy and the bases going insane, being whipped into a frenzy by the media and the politicians. And that's kind of my bottom line about stories like this, the selective outrage um, and the politicization of these discussions of economic topics like tariffs. And of course, anybody that watches me knows I have a lot of mixed feelings on tariffs. And I've looked at the history of tariffs, and this was a really interesting story for me. And of course, it starts with the fact that Trump instigated a fair amount of tariffs during his first term, and there wasn't any big fracas about them at the time. A little bit, but most of it, once again, was the media and Democratic politicians making an issue about it. And then Biden ran in 2020, uh, completely lambasting Trump's tariffs and talking about the fact that it was going to start trade wars and it wasn't going to make it was going to make products more expensive for Americans and everything else. But then he became president, and he quietly not only continued all of Trump's tariffs, but he expanded on them. And the numbers tell the story. During Trump's first term, he generated $90 billion in revenue from tariffs. And then under Biden, he generated $144 billion in tariffs. So that shows that he really not only approved and continued all of Trump's tariffs, but he expanded on them greatly to the point where the revenue was broaching double what Trump had done during his first term. And if you go back through Biden's term, the entire 4 years, right up to the last year, he was still using tariffs. And a lot of times he used tariffs the same way Trump did. He would use them for negotiation. He was talking about tariffs on Europe, and then he ended up coming up with an agreement with the Europeans by creating pressure on them from the idea of tariffs. And Europe went crazy when he talked about putting tariffs on. And in November 2021, he threatened to have tariffs on steel and aluminum. Here we are now. Trump has put even higher tariffs on steel and aluminum, but Biden had threatened to increase tariffs, particularly on Europe, and they backed down and they negotiated a new system. And it was kind of deceptive in a way because Biden didn't really, he got rid of tariffs per se, but he ended up creating a quota system so that Europeans ended up actually paying more because once any of the imports went over the quotas, then they ended up paying more than had they been paying tariffs. And so this whole idea of managed trade was something that both Trump and Biden did, or whoever was running the government under Biden. But Trump eliminated tariffs on all imports in his first term, eliminated all tariffs from Australia, Canada, and Mexico. And then Biden just continued to ratchet up tariffs on those very same countries. And once again, we're seeing Trump do these kind of things, and it's all outrageous. But when Biden did it, for some reason, nobody really said anything. And Europe is a good example because in 2021, when Biden was negotiating with Europe on the whole idea of tariffs, Europe initially retaliated and they doubled all their tariffs in 2021. And that's when Biden used it as a negotiating point and created a quota system instead. But all these tariffs basically violate WTO rules. Nobody's really talking about that. That's a whole other aspect of this. But Biden kept through his term, particularly in his last year in office, he instigated a whole bunch of tariffs. He put tariffs on steel and aluminum that came through Mexico that were made elsewhere, and he put a 25% tariff on steel, 10% tariff on aluminum, And then in May of 2024, he expanded all of Trump's tariffs on China, including on green energy, pork grains, medical supplies. And it's interesting too because Biden justified it by saying that China's been cheating on trade all these years, which is the same rhetoric that Trump uses. So virtually the same. Once again, it seems like people are for tariffs. It just depends on who's doing them, and that's part of the political partisanship that just drives me crazy. In September 2024, um, Biden increased a lot of tariffs on China from 7.5% to 100%. And that's another thing that Trump talks about is raising Chinese tariffs up to those kind of levels, depending on what they are. And in Biden's case, he put 100% tariffs on a whole range of things, including syringes, steel, battery parts, graphite, medical gloves, solar panels, semiconductors, electric vehicles, and apparel. And once again, we're seeing Trump do the same thing, but for some reason, of course, people are a lot more comfortable with the tariffs on China than they are in other countries. But still, all this rhetoric by Biden and Democratic politicians and the Democratic media about how outrageous Trump and his tariffs are, and they completely ignored Biden. Particularly in the last year Biden was in office, or like I said before, whoever was running the government at the time. And in August 2024, wasn't that long ago, Biden raised tariffs on Canadian lumber and raised tariffs from 18 to 14%. And of course, that immediately made building costs in the United States rise because we get so much lumber from China. But my bottom line is I pointed out in a lot of videos I have mixed feelings about tariffs. I think they're part of a bygone era, that we live in an era of globalization. And I know that a lot of the Trump agenda is rolling back a lot of things about globalization, but it doesn't change the fact that global economies are so intertwined now. It's a much more complicated process and has a lot more complicated results. And the fact is that U.S. manufacturing peaked in 1980, so that was 45 years ago. And American manufacturing has been in decline ever since. And tariffs could potentially bring back some manufacturing, but it's going to be a negligible amount considering how much has been lost. And so manufacturing's been farmed out to places like China. And so that's another quotient about tariffs, is that we better be careful because we get an awful lot of stuff that Americans like from China, and a lot of things that make products a lot cheaper, and there's no way around that. And putting tariffs on everything may even the playing field economically and for the elites, but for people on the streets buying things, it's definitely going to increase costs. But that said, there's the potential, at least according to some economists, that the tariffs by Trump could raise $3.7 trillion in the next 10 years, which is admirable if that's true. But that still only pays off 10% of the government debt, which I guess is laudable. But once again, tariffs are not going to be this economic miracle that Trump talks about. But we'll see. I'm willing to wait and see. I'm not an economist. I've studied a lot about economics, but this is the modern world, and things work a little differently now. And we'll see how it goes. One of the other things I think is interesting is that the Biden administration, of course, did studies about the tariffs, analyzing what to do after the first Trump administration was over, and they concluded that tariffs have been very effective, and they contributed a lot to corporations and companies and manufacturers sourcing away from China. So there's the potential that some of this could work, but I guess once again my bottom line is that the tariff revenues is not going to replace the income tax, although I've seen economists out there now claiming that potentially it could. I just don't see it. The amount of revenue from income taxes is massive, and the amount of revenue generated by tariffs is minuscule compared to what we get from income taxes. And that's part of the fantasy world I think Trump's living in. But once again, I'm not an economist, and maybe things could play out a lot differently than I imagine. We're going to find out, aren't we? I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?